The War of 1812 is often referred to as the Second War of Independence, was a high-stakes drama that almost shattered the young American Republic. This significant conflict between the United States and Great Britain was fueled by a complex mix of international tensions and domestic pressures. But what drove the United States to declare war on Britain? This was not just a war over territory or trade. It was a fight for respect and survival. Let's delve into the history and uncover the reasons behind this pivotal clash. When Thomas Jefferson assumed the presidency in 1801, he set out to enhance the United States' position on the world stage and secure its growth through territorial expansion. His vision was to solidify American strength and influence, starting with the ambitious Louisiana Purchase of 1803. This monumental acquisition, brokered with French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, effectively doubled the size of the young nation overnight. The Louisiana Territory, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, opened up a wealth of untapped land and resources, presenting boundless opportunities for westward expansion and settlement. Jefferson's strategic move was not just about gaining land. It was also about securing control over critical trade routes and natural resources that would fuel America's future growth. The purchase promised to enhance the nation's agrarian economy, provide new opportunities for American settlers, and establish a stronger foothold in North America. This expansionist vision, however, came with its own set of challenges and tensions, particularly as it drew the United States into conflicts over territory and trade, setting the stage for future confrontations with both European powers and Native American tribes. Jefferson's policies and the acquisition of such a vast territory underscored his administration's commitment to American growth and security, laying the groundwork for the complexities that would later contribute to the War of 1812. However, this expansionist vision did not sit well with Great Britain, which was embroiled in the Napoleonic Wars with France. The British, possessing the world's most powerful navy, dominated the Atlantic Ocean and frequently intercepted American ships trading with France. These seizures were not just an economic blow. They were also a national affront, as they directly challenged the sovereignty and dignity of the United States. The British justified their actions under the guise of wartime necessity, claiming they were preventing supplies from reaching their enemy. But to Americans, these acts were outright provocations that infringed on their neutral rights. The seizures not only disrupted the burgeoning American economy, but also struck at the core of the young nation's identity, as its citizens began to question whether the hard-won independence from Britain was truly respected. One of the most contentious and infuriating practices was impressment. The British forcibly conscripted American sailors into their Royal Navy, often in brutal and arbitrary fashion. British naval officers would board American vessels and, with little regard for the sailors' U.S. citizenship, would seize men they deemed to be British deserters or simply in need of service. This practice was not just a violation of American rights, but a blatant disregard for the sovereignty of the United States, treating its citizens as if they were still subjects of the British Crown. The humiliation and anger this caused were profound, fueling deep resentment across the nation. Newspapers, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike decried these abuses, calling them an affront to American honor and independence. The widespread outrage contributed to a growing sense of nationalism and a belief that the United States had to defend its rights and sovereignty against British overreach, no matter the cost. This escalating tension, compounded by the economic strain of British trade restrictions and the humiliation of impressment, pushed the two nations closer and closer to the brink of war, as the United States felt increasingly cornered and compelled to assert its independence on the world stage once more. On the other side of the Atlantic, Napoleon's France was also imposing trade restrictions, further complicating the already precarious situation for the United States. Napoleon's continental system, which sought to undermine Britain's economy by closing European ports to British goods, had significant repercussions for American commerce. The United States, a neutral party, found its merchants unable to freely trade with much of Europe, as French policies aimed to cut off Britain's access to the continent. This not only disrupted the transatlantic trade that was vital to the U.S. economy, but also placed American ships at risk of being seized by both British and French forces, depending on who they were trading with at the time. The US found itself squeezed between two great powers, both of whom were aggressively restricting American trade, leading to a sharp decline in economic stability and increasing frustration within the country. This economic squeeze exacerbated the growing tensions and contributed to the mounting pressure on the US government to take decisive action in defending its rights and economic interests on the global stage, setting the stage for the inevitable conflict. In response to the escalating aggressions from both Britain and France, President Thomas Jefferson enacted the Embargo Act of 1807, a bold and controversial move aimed at asserting American sovereignty by leveraging the nation's economic power. Jefferson's intention was clear. By halting all American exports, he sought to pressure the European powers into respecting US neutrality, particularly in maritime trade. The idea was that Britain and France, deeply involved in the Napoleonic Wars and reliant on American goods, would be forced to reconsider their policies if deprived of critical resources. However, the Embargo Act did not have the intended effect on Europe. Instead of coercing Britain and France into compliance, the act wreaked havoc on the American economy, which was heavily dependent on international trade. The bustling ports of New England, once vibrant with activity, fell silent as ships sat idle, unable to transport goods abroad. The American shipping industry, a cornerstone of the nation's economy, was particularly hard hit, leading to bankruptcies, unemployment, and widespread economic despair. The agricultural sector also suffered as farmers, unable to export their produce, faced plummeting prices and unsold surpluses. The widespread economic hardship fueled anger and resentment across the country, particularly in the Northeast, where merchants and shipowners felt the brunt of the policy's impact. Smuggling became rampant as desperate traders sought to circumvent the embargo, further undermining the policy. The political backlash was fierce, with Jefferson's opponents accusing him of overstepping his executive powers and damaging the nation's economy in pursuit of an unrealistic foreign policy goal. The Embargo Act, originally intended to be a peaceful alternative to war, instead deepened domestic divisions and sowed the seeds of discontent that would later contribute to the War of 1812. As the economic situation deteriorated and public outrage grew, Jefferson and his administration were forced to acknowledge the act's failure. In one of his final acts as president, the Embargo Act was repealed in March 1809, just days before he left office, replaced by the Non-Intercourse Act, which reopened trade with all nations except Britain and France. However, the damage had been done, and the economic and political scars left by the embargo would linger, setting the stage for the inevitable conflict that followed. James Madison, Jefferson's successor, inherited the ongoing tensions that plagued the young nation. As president, Madison faced the daunting task of addressing the unresolved conflicts with Britain that Jefferson's policies had failed to resolve. Despite his attempts to negotiate and avoid war, Madison's administration was continually frustrated by Britain's relentless maritime aggressions, including the continued impressment of American sailors into the Royal Navy, which was seen as a direct assault on American sovereignty. Furthermore, the British were widely suspected of inciting and supporting Native American resistance against American expansion on the western frontier, further fueling the already smoldering animosity between the two nations. Madison's efforts to protect American interests through diplomatic channels were increasingly met with British intransigence, leaving him with diminishing options as public and political pressure for a more decisive response grew. The mounting frustrations over British interference in American affairs and their perceived disrespect for U.S. sovereignty pushed Madison closer to the brink of war, setting the stage for the eventual declaration of war against Britain in 1812. On the western frontier, Native American tribes, led by the formidable Shawnee chief Tecumseh, were fiercely resisting the relentless American expansion. Tecumseh, along with his brother Tenskwatawa, who was known as the Prophet, sought to unite the diverse and often fragmented tribes into a powerful confederation. Their aim was to collectively oppose U.S. encroachment on their ancestral lands, which they saw as a direct threat to their survival and way of life. The British, who were entrenched in Canada, were seen by many indigenous groups as vital allies against the United States, offering the potential for military support and supplies. The US government, aware of this alliance, believed that expelling the British from Canada would sever the critical support lines for Tecumseh's Confederation, thereby quelling the indigenous resistance and resolving the ongoing conflicts on the frontier. This strategy of targeting British influence in Canada was central to the broader American military objectives during the War of 1812, as it was believed that without British backing, Native American opposition would collapse, allowing for unimpeded American expansion into the Western territories. As the United States grappled with escalating pressures from both British maritime practices and Native American resistance, President James Madison found himself facing mounting frustrations and an increasingly dire situation. The British practice of impressment, where American sailors were forcibly recruited into the British Navy, continued to inflame American sentiments. Coupled with this, the ongoing British support for Tecumseh's resistance and other Native American groups on the frontier compounded the sense of urgency. This situation was further exacerbated by economic difficulties caused by British trade restrictions and the adverse effects of the Embargo Act. Within Congress, a fervent group of young nationalistic lawmakers known as the War Hawks, led by figures such as Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, were increasingly vocal in their advocacy for war. They believed that a decisive conflict with Britain was necessary to assert American sovereignty and rectify the injustices being imposed upon the young nation. The War Hawks were driven by a desire to expand American territory, particularly eyeing Canadian lands, and to respond to what they perceived as British insults and provocations. They argued that only through war could the United States demonstrate its strength and resolve, and secure its position on the global stage. Amidst this climate of intense pressure and nationalistic fervor, Madison and his administration ultimately concluded that war was the only viable path forward. On June 18, 1812, the United States officially declared war on Britain, marking the beginning of the War of 1812. This decision was not only a response to the immediate grievances, but also a reflection of broader ambitions and strategic calculations. The declaration was a dramatic assertion of American rights and identity, aimed at confronting and overcoming the myriad challenges that had been undermining the nation's stability and growth. The War of 1812 was precipitated by a complex interplay of grievances and strategic considerations that simmered between the United States and Great Britain. A central issue was the British practice of impressment, which involved forcibly recruiting American sailors into the Royal Navy. This infringement on American sovereignty not only insulted national pride, but also ignited widespread anger, fueling demands for retribution. Concurrently, the British naval blockade of European ports and their restrictions on American trade, combined with Napoleon's retaliatory measures against Britain, severely disrupted American commerce. This economic stranglehold exacerbated the U.S.'s financial struggles and pushed the nation closer to conflict. Additionally, the U.S. government harbored suspicions that Britain was actively supporting Native American resistance to American expansion on the western frontier. Indigenous leaders, notably Shawnee Chief Tecumseh, sought to unite tribes against U.S. encroachment, and the perceived British backing for this resistance was seen as a deliberate threat to American territorial ambitions. This belief further inflamed the call for war. The conflict was also driven by the War Hawks, a group of fervent young Congress members who viewed war as an opportunity to assert American honor, expand the nation's territory, and decisively end British influence in North America. Their aggressive push for conflict was fueled by the broader economic pressures resulting from trade restrictions and the failed Embargo Act of 1807, which had already created significant economic strains and heightened frustrations. This combination of maritime grievances, economic pressures, territorial ambitions, and political fervor ultimately drove the United States to declare war on Britain, marking the beginning of the War of 1812. In July 1812, the United States, eager to assert its strength and achieve a swift resolution, launched an ambitious invasion of Canada. The U.S. government anticipated a rapid victory, assuming that the relatively small and sparsely populated Canadian territories would be easily overrun. However, the conflict quickly revealed itself to be far more complex and grueling than expected. The initial American efforts met with staunch Canadian resistance, bolstered by British forces and their Native American allies. This unexpected resistance, coupled with logistical challenges and strategic miscalculations, extended the war well beyond the anticipated timeframe. The War of 1812 unfolded with several pivotal moments that shaped its course. One of the most dramatic events was the burning of Washington, D.C. in August 1814, when British forces captured and set fire to significant landmarks, including the White House and the Capitol. This event was a major humiliation for the United States and underscored the vulnerability of the young nation. In contrast, the defense of Fort McHenry in September 1814 marked a crucial turning point. Despite the relentless bombardment by the British Navy, the American forces successfully repelled the attack, and the defense inspired Francis Scott Key to pen the Star-Spangled Banner, which would later become the national anthem. The war concluded with the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, a decisive American victory achieved under General Andrew Jackson. This battle was fought after the Treaty of Ghent had been signed, officially ending the war. But before news of the treaty had reached the combatants, the victory at New Orleans provided a significant morale boost for the United States and helped to solidify a sense of national pride and accomplishment. Despite its protracted nature and the many challenges faced, the War of 1812 ultimately affirmed American resilience and sovereignty. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, officially concluded the War of 1812, with both sides agreeing to return to the status quo ante bellum, effectively restoring pre-war conditions. Despite the formal end to hostilities, news of the treaty signing did not reach all the combatants in time, leading to the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, which was fought after the treaty had been agreed upon. This decisive American victory, under General Andrew Jackson, further solidified the nation's sense of triumph and resilience. The war's aftermath left both the United States and Britain without significant territorial changes or concessions, but the conflict had far-reaching impacts on American society and national identity. The War of 1812 was a catalyst for a surge in American nationalism. The successful defense of American territory, despite significant challenges, fostered a newfound confidence in the young republic's military and political institutions. The war also spurred economic changes, as the United States began to focus more on domestic manufacturing and less on reliance on foreign goods, leading to the growth of American industry. Politically, the war marked the decline of the Federalist Party, which had opposed the conflict and was perceived as unpatriotic, particularly after the Hartford Convention of 1814, where Federalists had discussed the possibility of New England's secession. This discrediting of the party allowed the Democratic Republicans to dominate American politics for years to come. Additionally, the war had a lasting effect on Native American tribes, as many had hoped for a British victory to halt American expansion, but were ultimately left without a strong ally. In essence, while the Treaty of Ghent restored pre-war boundaries and did not address all the underlying causes of the conflict, such as impressment or trade restrictions, it set the stage for a period of relative peace and national growth. The War of 1812 thus became a defining moment in American history, helping to forge a stronger sense of national identity and independence and paving the way for future American expansion and development. So, what could Jefferson and Madison have done differently to avoid the War of 1812, to mitigate the path to conflict? More effective diplomacy might have been key. Jefferson and Madison could have pursued stronger, more strategic negotiations with Britain to address issues like impressment and trade restrictions before tensions escalated, implementing alternative economic strategies, such as crafting trade agreements that could circumvent the embargo and bolster American commerce without provoking British ire, might have alleviated some of the economic pressures that fueled discontent. Addressing Native American concerns more proactively, perhaps through diplomacy and negotiation rather than military action, could have helped to reduce the perceived threat from British-backed indigenous resistance on the frontier. Ultimately, the War of 1812 emerged from a complex web of grievances and geopolitical pressures, reflecting the struggles of a young nation trying to assert itself on the world stage amidst the competing interests of powerful global adversaries. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the War of 1812, a pivotal conflict that shaped the course of American history. From the initial tensions and battles to the eventual peace treaty, this journey has uncovered the key moments and impacts of the war. If you found this video insightful and engaging, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth historical content. Your support helps us continue to bring you comprehensive and captivating stories from the past. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring history with us.